When I woke up, the crib was empty, and so was my heart. My baby was gone, and the only clue left behind was a note that read, "She's safer with me. Who took her? And why? What I uncovered will haunt you forever." The moment I read those words, my world collapsed around me. The empty crib in front of me was not just a piece of furniture. It was a void, a black hole sucking every ounce of air from the room. My baby girl, my sweet little Ella, was gone. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe she was with my mother or perhaps with the nanny. But deep down, I knew the truth. The note in my trembling hands was proof. Someone had taken her. The police arrived quickly after my frantic 911 call. My voice cracked as I explained the situation, the officer's calm demeanor doing nothing to ease the storm raging inside me. They asked me all the typical questions. Who could have done this? Did anyone threaten you? And then the question that changed everything. What about Ella's father? Her father. The man I once thought I knew. We weren't together anymore, not after what I found out about him. He had always been charming, too charming, perhaps. But beneath the surface lay something darker. He tried to fight for custody in court. But when his skeletons came tumbling out of the closet, the judge had sided with me. He wasn't safe. He wasn't stable. And now all signs pointed to him. The police started their investigation immediately, but I couldn't sit still. Couldn't wait. A mother's instincts are sharper than any detective's tools, and mine were screaming at me to act. My mind raced through every conversation, every interaction I'd had with him in recent weeks. He hadn't shown up at the custody hearing, but there had been phone calls, voicemails where he begged to see Ella, claiming he'd changed, that he deserved another chance. I never called him back. Could this be his revenge? I searched the house for more clues, my hands shaking as I rifled through Ella's belongings. That's when I noticed something that sent shivers down my spine. Her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one she couldn't sleep without, was gone too. He must have taken it to keep her calm. The police were following protocol, but I knew time wasn't on my side. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. My baby was out there, possibly scared, crying, wondering where I was. My desperation turned into determination. If they wouldn't move fast enough, I would. I grabbed my car keys and drove to the only place I thought he might go. His mother's house. She had always been overly protective of him, even when his behavior had become erratic. As I pulled up to the small, run-down home, my heart pounded in my chest. Would Ella be here? The porch light was off and the windows were dark, but that didn't stop me. I banged on the door with all my strength, shouting his name. "Open up! I know you're in there." There was no response. My hands throbbed from hitting the door, but I didn't care. My baby was all that mattered. When the door finally creaked open, it wasn't him. It was his mother. Her face was pale, her expression filled with both guilt and fear. "He's not here," she whispered, but I didn't believe her. I pushed past her, storming into the house. "Where is she?" I screamed. "Where's my daughter?" The house was empty, or so it seemed. I tore through every room, flipping over furniture, opening closets, looking for any sign of Ella. But there was nothing. As I stood in the middle of the living room, defeated, her mother finally spoke again. "He called me," she said quietly. "He said he's leaving town, and he's taking Ella with him." Those words ignited a fire inside me. I wasn't just going to sit back and let him vanish. I was going to find him, no matter what it took. As I left the house, her mother called out one last thing. "Check his old cabin in the woods. That's where he used to go when he wanted to disappear." A cabin in the woods? It sounded like a scene straight out of a nightmare, but I had no choice. I drove straight to the address she'd given me, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The road grew darker and narrower as I approached the forest. Finally, I saw it. A small, isolated cabin with its lights on. My heart raced as I stepped out of the car, the sound of my own breathing deafening in the silence of the woods. Was Ella inside? Was she safe? I didn't wait to knock. I stormed in, ready to fight for my daughter. But what I saw inside froze me in my tracks. Inside the dimly lit cabin, the air was thick with tension. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of Ella. The small living space was cluttered with discarded clothes and empty food containers. But no crib, no baby toys. Nothing that screamed a child had been here. For a moment, fear gripped me. What if I was too late? What if he'd already moved her somewhere else? And then I heard it, the faint, muffled cry. My heart leaped in my chest. It was coming from behind a closed door at the far end of the room. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing the door handle. It was locked. "Open this door," I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. "I know you're in there, and I know you have her." From the other side, I heard shuffling, and then his voice calm, unnervingly calm. "She's fine. Better than she ever was with you." I pounded on the door, my fists throbbing with each strike. "You don't get to make that decision. She's my daughter." His voice turned cold. "She's safer with me, and you know it. You never listened, did you? You never understood what I was trying to protect her from." What was he talking about? Protect her from what? My mind raced, trying to piece together his cryptic words. But I didn't have time to unravel his delusions. I needed to get to Ella. I scanned the room for something to break the door down. My eyes landed on a heavy iron poker near the fireplace. Without hesitation, I grabbed it and swung with all my strength. The wood splintered, and with one final blow, the door flew open. There he was, standing in the center of the room, holding Ella in his arms. She was wrapped in a blanket, her tiny face streaked with tears. But she was alive. She was safe. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by rage. "Give her to me," I demanded, stepping closer. He backed away, clutching Ella tighter. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling now. "They're coming for her. I had to take her. I had to keep her safe." "Who's coming?" I asked, my voice rising. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced nervously at the window, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. His paranoia was palpable, and it terrified me. Whatever delusions he was caught up in, they were driving his every move. "I'm not leaving without her," I said firmly, taking another step forward. "You're not well, and you know it. She needs me. She needs her mother." His grip on Ella loosened just slightly, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hand her over. But then his eyes hardened, and he shook his head. "I can't let you take her. I won't let you ruin her life like you ruined mine." His words cut deep, but I didn't have time to dwell on them. My focus was on Ella, and every instinct in me was screaming to act. I took a deep breath, my mind racing for a way to diffuse the situation. "Okay," I said softly, raising my hands in a gesture of surrender. "You're scared. I get that. But if you really believe you're doing the right thing, then let's talk about it. Let's figure this out together for Ella's sake." He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the window again. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I held my ground. I inched closer, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You love her," I continued. "I can see that. But love doesn't mean taking her away from everything she knows. It means doing what's best for her, even if it's hard. Please, let me take her home." For a moment, his resolve seemed to falter. His shoulders slumped, and tears welled up in his eyes. "I just wanted to protect her," he whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." I reached out slowly, my hands trembling. "You don't have to do this alone. We can figure it out. But first, you have to let her go." He stared at me, his expression a mix of fear, anger, and sadness. And then, finally, he nodded. Carefully, he placed Ella in my arms. As I held her close, Tears streamed down my face. She was safe. She was mine. But it wasn't over yet. As I turned to leave, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police were here, and they weren't going to let him walk away from this. The sirens grew louder, their piercing wail cutting through the tension like a blade. I clutched Ella tightly, her small arms wrapping around my neck as if she could sense my relief. But the man standing behind me, the man who was once her father, was frozen in place, his body trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "They're going to arrest me," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They'll lock me up, and she'll never know why I did this." I turned to face him, my voice firm but calm. "You did this because you were scared. But this isn't how you protect someone. This isn't love. You need to face what you've done." His eyes locked onto mine, searching for something. Understanding, forgiveness, maybe even a way out. But there was no way out. Not anymore. The sound of car doors slamming outside shattered the moment. Flashlights cut through the darkness as officers approached the cabin, their voices calling out commands. "This is the police. Step outside with your hands up." He backed away, shaking his head. "No, I can't. I can't go back there. I won't." "Stop," I shouted, fear clawing at my throat. "Don't make this worse. Please just come with me. I'll help you explain everything. Just don't do something you'll regret." But he wasn't listening. His breathing grew erratic, his movements frantic. He bolted toward the back door, his footsteps heavy against the wooden floor. Without thinking, I followed him, shouting for him to stop. As I rounded the corner, I saw him fumbling with a lock, his hands shaking too much to get it open. "You can't run," I cried out. "They'll find you. And if you leave now, Ella will never have the chance to know you as anything but the man who took her away." That stopped him. He turned to look at me, his face pale, his eyes hollow. I wanted her to have a better life," he whispered. "I wanted her to be safe." "She will be," I said softly. "But not if you keep running. You have to stop. For her." The door behind me burst open, and the room flooded with light. Police officers stormed in, their weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Hands in the air. Don't move." He froze, his hands slowly rising as the officers surrounded him. One of them stepped forward, his voice firm but calm. "We're here to help, but you need to cooperate. No one has to get hurt." I stepped back, holding Ella close as they placed him in handcuffs. His eyes met mine one last time, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I used to know, the man I once loved, before his world unraveled. As they led him away, Ella stirred in my arms, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mommy," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, my tears falling onto her soft hair. "You're safe now. Mommy's here." Outside, the police officers asked me a flurry of questions, but I could barely process their words. All I could think about was getting Ella home, holding her close, and never letting her go again. As I sat in the back of an ambulance with Ella wrapped in a warm blanket, one of the officers approached me. "You're lucky," he said. "Most cases like this don't end this way. You did the right thing by staying calm." But I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken, exhausted, and terrified of what could have happened. Still, as I looked down at Ella, her tiny fingers clutching mine, I knew one thing for sure. I would do anything to protect her. Anything. The days that followed felt like a blur, a whirlwind of questions, interviews, and endless paperwork. I was physically home with Ella, but my mind was trapped in the chaos of everything that had happened. The media had picked up the story, painting me as a hero mother, but I didn't feel like one. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The mix of desperation and guilt that haunted me more than I wanted to admit. Ella, on the other hand, seemed to bounce back quickly. Children are resilient like that. She was back to giggling at her favorite cartoons, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and falling asleep in my arms at night. But every time she called out for me, every time she reached for me, I felt the weight of what I had almost lost. And yet, something gnawed at me. The words he had said in the cabin kept replaying in my mind. They're coming for her. I had to keep her safe. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, a symptom of his deteriorating mental state. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. He wasn't a delusional man, he was methodical, calculating. What if there was some truth to what he was saying? One night, after putting Ella to bed, I found myself digging through the box of evidence the police had returned to me. Among the items was the note he had left in Ella's crib, the words scrawled in his familiar handwriting, "She's safer with me." I stared at it for what felt like hours, the implications sending a shiver down my spine. What was he trying to protect her from? The next morning, I decided to visit him in custody. It wasn't an easy decision. I had spent so long trying to keep him out of our lives, and now I was willingly walking into his world again. But I needed answers. I needed to know if there was more to the story than what I had assumed. The detention center was cold and unwelcoming, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. When he was finally brought out to the visiting area, I barely recognized him. The confident, charming man I had once known was gone. In his place was someone hollow, broken. "You came," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. "I need to know the truth," I replied, cutting straight to the point. "What did you mean when you said they were coming for Ella? Who are you talking about?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if someone might be listening. "I can't tell you everything," he said finally, "but you have to trust me. She's not safe with you. They're watching." "Who's watching?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "You keep talking in riddles and I'm tired of it. If you want to protect her, you need to tell me the truth." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you know everything about me, but you don't. There are people I worked with, dangerous people, who won't hesitate to use her to get to me. I tried to walk away from them, but they don't let people go that easily." I froze, his words sending a chill down my spine. I had always known he had a troubled past. But this was something else entirely. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter," he replied, his eyes filled with regret. "What matters is that they know about Ella now. And if you're not careful, they'll come for her." My mind raced as I tried to process what he was saying. Could this really be true? Was Ella in danger because of him? Or was this just another manipulation? Another attempt to control me? "I don't know if I believe you," I said finally, my voice shaking. "But if you're telling the truth, then you owe it to her to help me protect her. Tell me who these people are. Tell me how to stop them." He shook his head. "You can't stop them. All you can do is keep her hidden, keep her safe. Don't trust anyone, not even the police. They have eyes everywhere." I left the detention center more confused and terrified than ever. If what he said was true, then Ella wasn't just my daughter, she was a target. But how was I supposed to protect her from an invisible threat, from people I didn't even know existed? That night, as I tucked Ella into bed, I made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whoever I had to face, I would keep her safe. She was my world, my reason for fighting. And if they were watching, if they were waiting, I would be ready. For days I couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside my window looked like a figure lurking in the darkness. Every unfamiliar car parked near my house felt like a silent threat. I told myself I was being paranoid, that his words were just the ramblings of a desperate man. But deep down, I knew better. Ella deserved more than a life of fear, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. So I started preparing. I installed new locks on every door and window. I set up security cameras and even kept a knife hidden under my bed. It wasn't enough, though. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at me. Then, 2 nights later, my worst fears began to unfold. It started with a strange noise, a faint scraping sound at the back door. My heart stopped as I froze, listening intently. For a moment I thought I might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. Someone was out there. I grabbed the knife from under my bed and crept toward Ella's room. My pulse was racing as I peeked inside. She was still fast asleep, her chest rising and falling softly. I stepped back into the hallway and moved toward the living room, my grip tightening on the knife. The sound came again, but now it was at the window. I switched off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. My breathing was shallow, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? Before I could decide, the window shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the room. I stifled a scream, my instincts taking over as I crouched behind the couch. A figure climbed through the broken window, their movements swift and deliberate. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Get out of my house." The figure froze, their head turning toward my voice. In the faint moonlight, I could see their face partially obscured by a mask. They didn't say a word, but their presence was enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't some random burglary. They were here for Ella. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, I lunged toward the intruder, the knife raised in my hand. They dodged quickly, grabbing my wrist and twisting it painfully until I dropped the blade. I struggled against their grip, kicking and clawing, but they were too strong. "Where is she?" the masked figure demanded, their voice low and menacing. I didn't answer. Instead, I used all my strength to break free, scrambling toward Ella's room. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my hands trembling as I pressed my back against the door. Ella stirred in her bed, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" she murmured, her voice groggy with sleep. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Everything's going to be okay." The sound of heavy footsteps outside the door sent a fresh wave of terror through me. They were coming closer. I scanned the room, desperate for a way out. The only option was the window. "Ella, listen to me," I said, crouching down to her level. "We're going to play a game, okay? We're going to climb out the window really quietly, and then we're going to run as fast as we can." She nodded, her trust in me unwavering. I lifted her into my arms and opened the window, the cool night air rushing in. The drop wasn't far, but it would still be a challenge with her in my arms. Behind me, the door rattled violently as the intruder tried to break it down. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. With a deep breath, I climbed out the window and dropped to the ground, clutching Ella tightly. I ran, my feet pounding against the earth as I darted toward the tree line at the edge of the property. The night was eerily silent, the only sound my labored breathing and Ella's soft whimpers. But I wasn't fast enough. A second figure appeared ahead of me, stepping out from behind the trees. They blocked my path, their stance menacing. I skidded to a stop, my heart racing. I was surrounded. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "She's just a child. Don't hurt her." The first intruder caught up to me, their presence looming behind me like a shadow. I clutched Ella tighter, shielding her with my body as I braced for the worst. "We don't want to hurt her," the second figure said, their tone chillingly calm. "We're here to send a message. Your daughter is leverage and your ex knows it. Tell him to stop running. Tell him to come clean, or we'll be back." I stared at them, my body trembling with fear and anger. "She's innocent. She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," the first intruder said. "She's the only reason he'll listen." And just like that, they were gone. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there with Ella in my arms and a threat hanging over our heads. I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the sunlight felt like an unwelcome intrusion, mocking the chaos of the night before. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee, while Ella played with her stuffed rabbit in the living room. She was blissfully unaware of the danger that had seeped into our lives like a slow poison. I had spent the entire night thinking, replaying the intruder's words over and over in my mind. Your daughter is leverage. Tell him to stop running. This wasn't just about us anymore. It wasn't about custody battles or broken trust. It was bigger than that. These weren't just faceless enemies. They were people who knew how to strike where it hurt the most. And as much as I wanted to keep fighting on my own, I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, the number I swore I'd never call again. It rang twice before his voice came through, cautious and tired. Why are you calling me? They came last night, I said, cutting straight to the point. 2 of them. They broke into the house. They threatened Ella. There was silence on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Did they hurt her? No, I replied, my voice trembling. But they will if you don't tell me the truth. Who are these people? What do they want from you? He let out a shaky breath. They're not going to stop. Not until they get what they want. They think I have something I stole from them years ago. But I don't have it anymore. Then give them what they want. I snapped, the desperation in my voice undeniable. Do whatever it takes to make this stop. I can't keep looking over my shoulder every second of the day. Ella can't grow up like this. I can't, he said, his voice filled with regret. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. What they want doesn't exist anymore. And now they think she's the only thing I care about. They'll keep coming, using her as leverage. His words ignited a fire inside me. I wasn't going to let anyone, turn my daughter into a pawn. Then we fight, I said firmly. We end this together. You don't know what you're saying, he replied, his voice filled with fear. These people don't lose. You can't win against them. I don't care, I said, my resolve unwavering. If you're not willing to protect her, then I'll do it myself. I'll go to the police. I'll go to the press. I'll expose them. No, he shouted, panic lacing his words. You can't do that. If you make this public, they'll come after you harder. You'll be putting a target on both of your backs. Then give me another option, I challenged, because I won't just sit here and wait for them to come again. There was a long pause before he finally spoke. There's a safe place, he said reluctantly. A cabin, far out in the woods. I used it once when I was hiding from them. It's off the grid, no phones, no internet. You'll be safe there. And what about you? I asked. Are you coming with us? No, he said quietly. If I go, they'll find us. But if I stay behind, I can lead them in circles, keep them off your trail. It's the only way. For a moment, I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that he couldn't just abandon us again, that he had to take responsibility for the chaos he had brought into our lives. But I realized that this was his way of protecting us, his way of making up for the mistakes he had made. Fine, I said finally. But if anything happens to Ella, I'll hold you responsible. Do you hear me? Loud and clear, he replied. I'll send you the location. Pack only what you need and leave tonight. That night, I loaded Ella and a few belongings into the car and drove into the unknown. The cabin was exactly as he described. Remote, hidden, and eerily quiet. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fortress compared to the vulnerability of our old life. For weeks, I waited for something to happen. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside, sent my heart racing. But no one came. Slowly, I began to breathe easier. Ella adjusted surprisingly well, her innocence shielding her from the weight of what was happening. One day, I received a package at the post office in town. Inside was a single envelope with no return address. It contained a photograph of Ella and me, taken from a distance, along with a note. She's safe. Keep it that way. I knew it was from him. I didn't know where he was or what had become of him, but I knew he was still out there, watching over us in his own way. For now, we were safe. The nightmare wasn't over, but it was quieter, more distant. And as I looked at Ella, playing in the sunlight outside the cabin, I felt a glimmer of hope. No matter what came next, I would protect her. I would fight for her, because no one, no threat, no shadow from the past would ever take her from me again.